And we're live. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. I'm really excited to break down some awesome lakes for my Patreon subscribers today on the stream. But before we get into that, I want to let all of my new viewers know that this is my live stream format, which is an hour of me looking at Google Maps and Navionics maps of my subscribers' lakes and breaking them down, showing them really good areas to fish on their lakes. And this is a really long form video, and it's really in depth. And so if this is your first time checking out my channel, I would definitely recommend going to my YouTube page down below, clicking on the Fish the Moment icon, and checking out some of my shorter videos. They're 10 to 12 minutes long. They're a lot easier introduction to the channel. They break down things in a lot more simple, visual way, and they could definitely help you become a better bass fisherman and help you put some really big bass consistently in the boat this summer and the rest of the year. So definitely check those out. But for everyone else who's joining for their regular dose of Fish the Moment on their Tuesday night, welcome. We got all the regulars in here. We got Ulysses, we got Ken, Mike, Richard, Lewis, Dan, Dale, Roger, got PK, Clayton. So many guys in here. And Luis with the 49.99 super chat. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I think it's Luis, but thank you so much for the super chat right off the bat. That's awesome. I really appreciate that. And he said in the comments, looking forward to a great live stream. And so got all the regulars in here, JC, Ian, Clifford, Mario, Kevin, so all the guys. So it's great to see everyone, Chad, Brady, Joseph. So again, really excited to get going. Clayton, I agree. Heck of a way to start a live stream. It's awesome. Thank you guys again for all the support you guys have been giving me over the last 2 or 3 months. And I actually have a big announcement to make. Just last week, I gave my 1-month notice to my corporate job, and I'm going to be starting Fish the Moment, doing instruction and videos full time starting in June. And so I'm going to be ramping up all my content, posting 3 to 4 videos a week. I'm going to be doing online fishing lessons through my website, fishthemoment.com, on the water fishing lessons, all kinds of stuff. And I've been doing all of this part-time while I was working like 90 hours a week. And so it's pretty awesome to make this jump. I have a lot of cool opportunities coming up that I'm going to be sharing with you guys going forward. I have a lot of cool projects in the works that I think you guys are going to love, and it's things I've been trying to figure out how I could make over the years. And so a lot of great fishing content coming to my website, coming to the channel, and I'm doing some collaborations with some really cool stuff too. So thank you again for all the support, guys. It has been an awesome ride so far, and we're kind of just at the start of the journey here. So what I want to do is give you a little bit of an idea of how my fishing's been going recently. I've actually been getting out in the water a little bit more recently just because I've been doing some on-the-water fishing lessons with guys. And then I also want to get into the stream, obviously, and look at some of these lakes. We have Sooner Lake in Oklahoma, which is a power plant lake. We have Yatesville Lake in Kentucky, which is a kind of narrow lake with a lot of standing timber. And then we got Big Green Lake up in Wisconsin, where I actually finished second in the Fishers of Men tournament when I was 12 years old. And so I got some experience on some of these lakes, and I also have some good insight to give there. But basically, as far as my fishing's been going, I'm just gonna, give you guys an idea of what's been going on in my area and let some people join in as usual. So I've been fishing a lot on Table Rock Lake recently, which is up in southern Missouri, northwest Arkansas area. Cyber Drew 7 said, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the $10 super chat. And he says, can you give a shout out to my wife, Tara, and mention Wather? Wather? I'm not really sure what that means, but we got congrats from Tara. Thank you so much. Both you guys, Drew and Tara, thank you for the support. I'm glad you enjoy the channel. I'm glad you're on the stream. So shout out to Tara. And so what I was saying was on Table Rock, I've been out there and I've been fishing a little bit, and I've been doing on-the-water fishing lessons, which is basically where I go out in a subscriber's boat or you can go in my boat, and we have been doing a lot of offshore fishing where we're graphing around in 15 to 35 feet of water. I'm showing subscribers how to find fish on the lake. And the first day on Table Rock, we went out there. First spot we pulled up on, we graphed over, saw a bunch of fish on the graph, and I was like, oh, they're down here. 3 or 4 casts later, hooked a 2 3/4 pound spot and a 2 3/4 pound smallmouth in 25 feet of water. Fish were post spawn. It was a really cool bite. And so I'm making videos on all that stuff here coming up in just a little bit this week. And then also went to Lake Uchi, which is a lake in Oklahoma that's just south of Grand Lake, and had another lesson out there with Mike, who's in the comments here. And we had a blast graphing offshore ledges, and the water in Oklahoma has been super high. We've had a ton of rain, and the water's been in the bushes. And you would think that with all of that rain, that muddy water running through these lakes, these fish would pull up shallow, because normally when the water rises, the fish will pull up shallow onto the banks and get in the flooded cover. But what had happened during the week is that the water was actually falling out of the bushes. And so we were able to find a few fish on their early summer ledges and catch fish on deep diving crankbaits and swing heads. And we would find the fish on the graph, see the school down there, and then fire down there. And Mike put a good 5.5 pounder in the boat, some other good 2.5 to 3 pound bass. And so another successful trip. So if you guys do want to book an on the water fishing lesson with me in the Northwest Arkansas area, whether that's eastern Oklahoma, southern Missouri, or northwest Arkansas, or in the central Arkansas area around Little Rock, Hot Springs, Russellville, that area, I have a few more lessons available in May and June, but they're almost all sold out. So if you guys want to book a lesson on the water with me, I would do it now, because I am almost already filled up, and I'll be opening more lessons in July. But we are in the hotbed for offshore bass fishing right now. It is the time to get out on the lake and learn how to fish offshore, and I'm going to be out on these lakes a lot, so I'll be able to put you guys on some good fish, show you where the fish are, how to look at them on your graph, how to find them. We can actually look for new spots, all kinds of stuff, get you some confidence with certain baits, things like that. And so if you want to check that out, just go to my website, fishthemoment.com, and just go to the book now button, and you'll see it there. So anyways, got some guys asking about, curious what you guys in Wisconsin would focus on in the spring. So we'll be looking at that in a little bit too, Jeremy, and we'll talk about that coming up. So let's jump right into it. We got about 90 guys on, and we're about 7 minutes in. So let me jump straight into my first lake breakdown, which is going to be Sooner Lake in Oklahoma. Give me 1 second here while I switch this all over. Here we go. Sooner Lake in Oklahoma. So Sooner Lake is a hot water discharge lake, or a power plant lake. And if we zoom out, we can see that it's kind of in the center of Oklahoma. We have Tulsa over here, so it's kind of like central east Oklahoma. That was actually not really that helpful of a zoom out. Apologize for that. But if you look at this lake, it has a kind of a weird layout. You have the, it looks like the intake for the power plant here, and then you have this long, narrow area that funnels that water through, and then you have a big open part of the lake that's pretty clear, and then you have the warm water part of the lake where you actually have the discharge over here that discharges, it looks like, into the lake, and you have this big open bowl. And I don't even know if you can actually get into this area. It looks like you can kind of snake through here, and it looks like this is the warmer water on the lake is in this part, and then it's probably a little bit cooler out here. And one thing when I was researching this lake I saw is there's actually some really good underwater vegetation, so grass in this lake. And so that's going to be a big player on this lake even throughout the summer. And when the fish are going to be in their post-spawn patterns coming up, these fish are going to use that grass, and they're going to live there all summer long. And so what I want to talk about is specifically how I would target this lake offshore. And we're going to focus on all these lakes, on how to find those offshore areas, because a lot of times it's pretty easy in the post-spawn to just run down the bank with a spinner bait, with a top water bait, with a wacky worm, and catch fish. And when I'm talking post-spawn, I'm talking about when the water temperatures are in the 65 to 75 degree range. The fish have just got done spawning, and they're either moving out to deep water where they'll summer, or some of them will stay near the bank. And so again, you can basically, if you really want to just go catch fish, run down some of these banks with a wacky worm, with a fluke, a floating worm, a spinner bait, anything like that, and you can catch fish this time of year. But a lot of times, the bigger fish actually pull offshore pretty quickly right after they spawn. And a lot of times, if you can find those first groups of fish that move offshore right when they get off the beds, you can catch some really big fish out there, and you can have those fish completely to yourself. And if some of you guys were paying attention to the live footage from the most recent FLW Tour event on Lake Chickamauga, you'll know that a lot of the guys were catching fish on the beds and up spawning. And there were some guys who were fishing up shallow, done some pre-spawn bass. But there were also some guys like Buddy Gross who were catching them offshore. And he finished, I think, second or third or something like that in that tournament. And he was fishing off the bank offshore. And so you can definitely catch some really good fish, even right when those fish are still spawning. When the water temperature is about 65 degrees, you can still catch fish offshore that are post-spawn. And I guarantee you, right now, you can find fish on Sooner Lake offshore, because I was catching some just a few, maybe 100 miles to the east on Lake Uchi in Oklahoma offshore. So when we're talking offshore fishing, really the best way to do that is to look at a Navionics map. And so I'm going to switch over to Navionics really quick here, and then we're going to jump straight into that. There we go. So we got 96 people on, a little bit light tonight. Hopefully you guys are not forgetting about the channel. I know that normally I get a few more people on a little bit later in, but I'll also be posting more videos. So hopefully that'll kick up the channel. But other than that, let me just give you a look at Sooner Lake. So if we look at here, you can see there is a lot of really deep water on this lake. So you have the center of the creeks are 75 feet deep. And as you go down towards the dam, you maybe even have 80 to 90 feet of water in this general area. And so, by the way, thanks so much again to Cyber Drew for another $2 super chat. Congrats, Johnny. Your videos are the best. Thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate that. So, and again, shout out to Tara one more time. But we got Sooner Lake here, and you can see there's a lot of really good offshore cover and structure for these bass to get on. The cover would be the hydrilla or the grass that's under the water, and the structure would be all these contour lines that you see out here. And normally when you're trying to find fish offshore on a lake that has a lot of deep water, it also has grass on it, you'll find that some of the fish are going to stay near that grass, either on the inside edge or the outside edge of that grass, pretty much year round. And there's also going to be some bass that push out here into very deep water on top of some of these ridges or these points out here in 20 to 25 feet of water. And so to kind of give you an idea of how this lake might set up, and I'm not 100% on this, I'm going to make my best educated guess off of what I see from the map and on Google Earth, but my guess would be that the grass on this lake is probably going to run out to maybe 10 to 12 feet of water. And so that grass will taper down. It'll be pretty high off the bottom, out into about 10 to 12 foot, and then there'll be a sharp edge where basically the edge of the lake is, or the edge of that grass basically makes a straight wall, and that's the outside grass line. And so let's assume that for this lake, the outside grass line is on the 15-foot contour line. So at 15 feet, that outside grass line ends. And so that means that you can find this grass all the way out to 15 foot. Maybe that grass is sitting up 3 to 4 to 5 feet off the bottom in 15 feet of water. And so what I'm looking for on a lake where the outside grass line is about 15 feet of water is basically places where I see a group of contour lines close together near that 15 foot. For example, this area right in here. This area, you can see there's a nice little high spot up here, and there's another high spot in here, and then there's a group of contour lines that are pretty close together off this ridge that runs out in the center of the lake. And these contour lines are pretty close together. That means there's a sharper drop, and the contour lines end, and they get a little bit flatter out in about 18 to 19 feet of water. And so this sharp edge is going to create a sharp wall of grass that those bass can use and move up and down on. And what I do in the summertime and in the post-spawn on a lot of these lakes is I actually will pitch a 1 ounce or a 1 1/4 ounce jig with a striking rage cross, so a big flipping jig, or I'll put a punch skirt with like a 1 ounce tungsten weight and put like a creature bait on it and flip the outside grass lines on these lakes. And these fish will plot on those outside grass lines. They'll summer there all summer long. And these areas can be good from, let's say, June all the way up through the end of August into September. And we'll look at a few more of those areas in a second here. One of them might be like even just down this bank here. You can see these contour lines get tighter together. They're a little bit more spread out, and then they get really tight together right here. These type of areas where you have that hard grass line, you can pitch this grass line right in here, and those fish will pull out from the bank right to that grass line, and you can crush them. And then before those fish actually get to these offshore grass lines, a lot of times the fish will transition from the bank out to this outside grass line, and they'll follow some of these ridges, they'll follow some of these points out here, and they'll set up on these high spots, like this 6 foot of water up here, or this 6 foot, or this 8 feet of water up on this flat, or even this high spot up here on this ridge. And the reason they set up on these high spots, especially on lakes up north, is that the high spots here are going to have harder bottom, and that's going to attract certain types of bait fish. And so in the south, in Oklahoma, these high spots will have rock down there. You'll have harder bottom in that grass, and those bluegill will set up on these high spots. And up north, the same exact thing applies, but you'll have perch that's set up on these high spots. And again, the high spots are just places where you kind of have circles and these contour lines coming up to an area where you have a circle with nothing inside of it right here. And so this high spot's always going to have a harder bottom, because if you think about how like current and wave action and stuff goes across these points, the bottom is going to get eroded away where it's just silty and sandy, and then anywhere where there's hard bottom or rock is going to stay higher in the water, and that will attract all those bait. And so if we zoom around the lake here, we can try to find a few more high spots just to give you an idea of what another high spot would look like. So as we zoom around here, let me continue to try to find one. I only found one before I could jump on the stream, so give me a second. Sometimes it takes me a minute to find these. So like right here, here's another little high spot right here. In the middle of this bay, we have a nice high spot. It's a circle that comes up in the middle of this flat. These fish will be spawning in this pocket, and right after they spawn, they'll pull out to this 5 foot high spot. And again, you can fish baits like that 1 ounce jig, or if you're in like 5 foot of water here, you can throw baits like a worm. You can fish a swimming worm like a zoom speed worm or a striking cutter worm. Maybe even fish like a jerk bait over the top of these if the grass is a little bit lower to the bottom, or fish a top water over the top of these areas. And another spot that looked really good to me was this little pond back here, actually. It's a nice little pond. You'll have a depression in that grass. And really what you're looking for on these grass lakes is sharp contour lines, like I showed you in the first spot, these high spots, or any depressions in that grass. So this pond will create a depression in that grass, and those fish will set up there. It looks like there's several of these ponds around the area that you can definitely check out. They're actually all around here. And so even like right here, here's a nice little pond where if you look at this spot, this is actually a really good spot. You can see right here, you have that 15 foot of water, you have that grass edge that will be in 15 foot. I'm just assuming it's in 15 foot. It's not always going to be in 15. It could be in 10 or 12. But basically that 15 foot stops here, and then you have this hole in the grass, or this pond that's down here, and that will create a good piece of deep water, and those fish will set up on the edge of this grass right next to that hole, and you'll pitch your jigs and stuff around there and catch some good fish. And so, that's kind of one of the ways you can catch fish on these lakes. Again, look for high spot, or look for these sharper drops around that 15 foot of water. Like up here, it's just another good little area. You have a high spot right here. You have a sharp drop right off this from this pocket. This sharp drop is going to be a really good place for fish to set up in the summertime. Flip that outside grass line. The next thing that you can definitely do on these lakes is, if you don't want to try to fish around the grass, what you can do is try to find some of these ledges that are further away from the outside grass line. So if you look at a ledge like right here, you have this outside grass line that ends in 15 feet of water. And actually this little spot right here could be really good, where that grass line ends, or the outside grass line ends, and you have that deep drop here, or even like right over here. I always see so many spots I like, guys. It's hard to talk about it in a 10-15 minute live stream per lake. I could talk about these lakes for like 3 hours. I know some of you guys would love that too. But what I look for are places like this where you have these contour lines that are super, super tight together. And basically the creek channel or something like that will swing in here, and the top of this ledge is in 20 feet of water, maybe 18, 19, 20 feet of water, and these fish will set up on these ledges, and this is a ledge. And even though you might think a ledge is like only on the Kentucky Lake, the Tennessee River, places like that, this is an example of a ledge that's just on a power plant lake here in Oklahoma. And what I'll do is just fish these with a deep diving crankbait, a football jig, a big jigging spoon, like a flutter spoon or a big swim bait, and I'll fish them off these ledges. And this is how the guys on Lake Fork were catching them during the Bassmaster Elite Series event on Lake Fork. They're fishing offshore ledges that looked exactly like this down on Lake Fork. And so you can find a lot of these ledges all around the lake. And normally on these Oklahoma lakes, I don't like to probably look for ledges that are deeper than about 20 foot. Normally the water clarity isn't super clear on these lakes, and so you don't need to worry about trying to find a ledge like out here where the tip of the point's in 36, 37 feet of water. That's just going to be too deep most of the time on these lakes. So instead, just focus on places where you have, the tops of these ledges top out in maybe 18 to 20 feet of water. You might be able to find some fish even down to 24, 25 feet of water, like this ledge right here. Here's a nice point, and that contour line swings in. Right in here off this little tip of this point could be a really good offshore spot with a Carolina rig, and even that grass edge will end here, and you can fish the edge of that grass with a Carolina rig, things like that. And then, there's a lot of other places in here, even like this little drop right here, 24 feet of water. It may be a little bit too deep, but it might still hold some fish off this point. And then there's also going to be some fish that set up like on this big hump out here off the end of this ridge. So good summertime spots. And really in general, when you're looking for spots this time of year, like let's say you wanted to go try to catch fish in May, what I'm focused on is offshore is trying to find places that are close to the back of a pocket or just in the mouth of a pocket, like this area in here. I'm looking for places that are either the fish are just moving out to, so maybe like this little point that sticks out here. You might be able to find some fish set up on this point right here, or you may be able to find them even set up on this point that runs out here. And again, find them on graphing them with your graph, fishing deep diving crankbaits, fishing a Carolina rig, stuff like that. Or you can find them on some of these maybe first main lake points, like right out here. They're just in front of these pockets, and these are places the bass will still sit in the summertime. But really, when those fish just get off the beds and move out of these pockets, they'll pull about halfway out into the center of these pockets or creeks, or just in the mouth of them. That's where you're going to find the majority of your fish, and that's where I was finding them on Lake Uchi in Oklahoma. I was finding them, like, let's say there was a pocket that looked like this. We were finding them on like this drop out here that's just on the outside of these pockets, but it's not like way out here in the middle. Or we would find them like maybe around this turn right in here, just kind of graphing down this little edge of this 14 to 20 foot of water range. So that's my breakdown of Sooner Lake. There's a lot of other factors that can go into it. You can obviously run up shallow and fish a frog in that shallow grass, or fish some sort of flipping bait or whatever you want up shallow. But if you're looking for offshore fish, those are the areas I would at least give a shot to. So anyways, got 120 people on now. At least people are remembering that we have a live stream. But let's really quick answer a few comments here. And thanks to all the guys who are putting at Fish the Moment and then a bunch of question marks at the end of their questions. Is the easiest way for me to find your questions. And so let me run through a couple of them really quick that I see. So from the edge of the ledge, in this he's saying, are you using braid or fluorocarbon? Probably when I'm talking about flipping that big heavy jig. Whenever I'm flipping a 1 ounce jig or something that's really heavy, like let's say more than 3/4 of an ounce, I'm going to be using braided line, especially when I'm fishing around grass. Green braid will blend in with that grass so well that those fish will not be able to tell. All they're going to be focusing on is that bait falling past their face really quickly. And then Andrew says, do you use side imaging to find submerged grass lines? Yes, that is definitely the case. What I'll do is I'll actually drive my boat down like the edge of these areas here, like graph around here, and I'm going to be looking at my side imaging, and basically what you'll see on the side of your graph is a bunch of, it looks kind of like a speckly, it almost looks like stucco on your walls, so like, or on your ceiling. It looks like stucco on the graph. And so it's going to be kind of, I don't know. I guess you guys probably know what stucco looks like, but you'll see it's kind of like fuzzy or almost like hairy on the side of your graph, and you'll see it's nice and clean and smooth, and then it'll get looking kind of hairy and prickly, and that's when you know you'll find the grass. And then normally what I'll do is just make waypoints down that grass line with my side imaging. I'll come back in, and then I'll make sure I'm staying far enough away from that grass line, especially if that grass line is deep and you actually can't visibly see the grass. A lot of times if the grass is high enough in the water, you can actually see the grass and make your pitches down the grass line. But when it's a little bit deeper than that, you may have to actually mark it with waypoints before you get up and fish it. So some good questions right there. Let's jump to one more right here. Artie Prevents Camping says, a friend of mine and I caught about 40 fish last week swimming shaky heads on bluff walls on Cumberland. Where else and when do you think this would work? So bluff walls are definitely a really good pattern on a lot of these lakes right now. A lot of these fish are going to be setting up on those bluff walls. They're just outside of a lot of the spawning pockets and stuff like that. And so that's another pattern that will also work in the fall. So it works really well in the post spawn, and it also works well in the fall when those bass are moving back into the creeks. And so I would try that back around like September, October time. You'll be able to catch some pretty good fish already. So one more. Andrew Smedley says, awesome answer. Thank you. Cool. So I got that. Got the answered. So I'm going to jump now to the next lake, guys. We're going to jump to Yatesville Lake in Kentucky. So let me switch over to Google Earth and switch over to that lake really quick. Okay, we're flying over there. So Yatesville Lake in Kentucky. So now we're going from Oklahoma all the way over to Kentucky. I try to show you guys a lot of different lakes around the country. It seems like a lot of you guys are coming from Texas, from Georgia, from Kentucky, Tennessee area, and then from Florida. So got guys from all over the place. Kind of tracking some of the metrics on my website and see which regions of the country are going to be the most popular. And one thing I'm thinking about doing, guys, is I'm going to be making stock map breakdowns for different lakes around the country for summertime bass fishing. So I'm thinking about doing Toledo Bend, Sam Rayburn Reservoir, some of the Tennessee River lakes like Pickwick or the Kentucky Lake, and then also thinking about doing some lakes in Georgia and Florida. And so I'm thinking about putting a poll up on my Patreon page. And so if you want to have a chance to vote on some of the lakes I'm going to be making map breakdowns of for my website, which are just going to be stock maps that you can buy, and I'll have like 50 areas marked on your lake, on each lake, so you'll be able to see, oh, these are the type of areas that Johnny would check out offshore fishing. And it's not that I'll know that the fish are there per se, but they're areas where the fish will get that time of year, and a lot of times fish will only use offshore areas like maybe once every 3 or 4 years. So even though the area may not have fish on it when you go there, it may be a spot that year over year you might be able to find fish. And so I'll be putting those up on my website here pretty soon. But if you do want to have me make a map breakdown of your home lake, definitely go join my Patreon page, which is over there in the bottom right corner. You can also put your lake in for a live stream lake breakdown like some of the guys did today. For example, we had for Sooner Lake, we had Brandon for my Patreon page, just Brandon, submit Sooner Lake, and then we had Brandon Pack for Yatesville Lake we're looking at, and then we had Pete Welter for Big Green Lake, which we're going to be looking at in a second. So we have a lot of guys submitting lakes on Patreon for the live stream. You can also help vote on video ideas and all kinds of stuff, especially when I'm going full-time, guys. If you are a Patreon member, I'm going to be giving you a lot more benefits because I'll just have a lot more time to actually do stuff rather than having to work corporate job 50 hours a week and then do this part-time. So a lot of new benefits coming to the Patreon members as well. So I would join now to get a full access to all those benefits as they roll out. So other than that, the Yatesville Lake here is a pretty interesting lake. I really like it. And basically what you'll see here is that the lake is really narrow. It's like super narrow. And I don't know if I've ever fished a lake that sets up quite like this lake where it's narrow all the way around the lake. A lot of times you'll fish like backs of creeks and stuff like that. But basically you'll run, into all these little pockets and stuff in the backs of creeks, but there's normally a big open area somewhere in the lake, but not here. And so that's really interesting. And then it's also interesting that the water is actually pretty clear up and down this lake until you get about to this part of the lake. So it's really muddy, maybe a foot to foot and a half visibility in this region of the lake. You can tell that because the water here is a lot browner. And then as you move up here, you'll see the water gets a lot more dark and even a little blue in this part of the lake. So this probably has 2 to 5 feet of visibility on it. And another thing you'll notice about this lake is if we zoom in really tight, you'll see that there's a lot of standing timber in this lake. And so I don't know if y'all can see that very clearly, but you'll see that there's a bunch of stick-ups and standing timber all up and down this lake. And so it has a really good combination kind of that narrow water or that narrow creek look plus the standing timber. So it sets up really similarly to a lot of places I fish on Beaver Lake in Arkansas. And so I think that I should be able to give some pretty good tips just based on that. But what I want to talk about for this lake, Yatesville Lake, is how to find fish away from the bank on a lake like this going into May and into the summertime. And again, in the post-spawn, it's really easy to just run down some of these banks. You can fish a spinnerbait, a squarebill crankbait, and pitch a jig at the bank, fishing visible cover, and catch fish. But that's not really that exciting for me. And also, there's going to be about 100 other guys doing that every weekend on this lake. And so if you want to separate yourself from the competition, or if you just want to have a little bit more fun, if you're a recreational angler and want to challenge yourself to find fish away from the bank, I'm going to be showing you guys a few areas that I think would work really well. So let me switch over to Navionics so we can actually take a look at this lake. There we go. So Yatesville Lake. So Yatesville Lake is again, very, very, very narrow lake, and it looks like it doesn't have that much offshore cover. There's not a lot of humps. There's not that many like long tapering points. There's not a lot of ledges in this lake. And so some guys are always asking me, how do I fish a lake like a lake in Wisconsin where it's basically just one big bowl? And we'll talk about that in a second on Big Green, because Big Green is literally just a big bowl. And that will be, a good thing to talk about. But at the same time, if we're looking at Yatesville Lake, it's almost the opposite. It's just a super narrow lake where it drops into 40 feet pretty much immediately on both sides. There's very few sloping shores or sloping points or anything like that. And so it's the opposite conundrum where instead of being a giant bowl, this is basically like a just giant, ditch. It drops off into both. It drops off on both shores really fast, and there's not that many places to fish offshore. Or you would think that, because both the lakes that look like bowls and lakes that look like this do have places these fish will get offshore. They're just not as obvious, and they're not as textbook as a lot of the places I just showed you on the Sooner Lake area. So let's talk about some offshore areas on this type of lake, and then we'll get to Big Green, and this way you'll have a look at what a normal lake sets up like offshore that maybe has some creek channels and looks very textbook, a lake like this that's very windy and narrow, and then that big bowl. So starting from the dam, really the areas I'm going to be looking for, especially when these fish are just getting off the beds, are places where this creek channel, which is this main river channel you would call it, runs up in front or in the mouth of any spawning pockets. So right in here, for example, you have this creek that winds through, and it runs in the mouth of this spawning flat. It's a very shallow water up in here. And if we look at this area, you'll notice that you have 30 feet of water out here, 45 feet of water, and then there are a few places off this point where the contour lines actually start to spread out just a little bit around this island. And there's actually a stretch of shallower water right in here that's maybe 10 to 12 feet deep. And let's switch back over to Navionics or Google Earth really quick to give you guys a feel for what this looks like. If we zoom in, you'll see that there's actually a pretty steep shoreline, and then it starts to spread on out as you go around this corner into this pocket, and so it flattens out right about in here. And there's actually not very much standing timber in this area, but there is a little bit of flatter water, and there is some timber out here, so I'm expecting there to be a few trees kind of setting out off this point, maybe some isolated trees. They're just sitting out here, but they're not as many as you see like back in this creek. You can see there's a ton of trees. There may only be 3 or 4 trees down this whole area. And so if we switch back over to Navionics, what I'd be looking for in this area is I'd be looking for basically isolated trees that are very close to this creek channel turn, right off of this island where it transitions from shallower water back out to deep water, right in here. And I'd be looking for, let's say there's 2 or 3 big trees just off this island, and it's not like it's really an offshore place, but these trees will be out here in 10, 12, 13, 15 feet of water, maybe a cast or maybe a half a cast away from the bank. And what you can do is actually crank these spots with a deep diving crankbait and actually bring those crankbaits through those isolated trees, or you can fish a jig or like a 10-inch ribbon-tail worm through those trees and catch some really good fish on these areas, on these isolated trees that are, again, in 12 to 13 feet of water, maybe out to 20 feet if it gets a little bit later in the summer. And these fish will set out here and they'll basically kind of use this creek channel as a place to summer on, and they'll sit here all summer long. But then they can pull right back up onto these shallower, flatter areas to feed when you get wind, when you get current, stuff like that. And it's right in the mouth of this nice spawning pocket, so it's a good place for these fish to move to right after they spawn. Another good area that looks really good if we kind of go back into one of these creeks a little bit is you have this nice little point that sticks out here. This is a super obvious spot. There's like 12 personal markers from people who say, oh, this looks like a good spot. And it's really one of the few areas where you have an actual point that sticks off the bank and sets up like a traditional offshore area. So just a spot to check out and kind of keep your eye on. And then another spot that I saw back in here that I thought looked really good is this slightly shallower point back in here. And this is really subtle stuff, guys, but this is the stuff that I catch a lot of big fish on, especially right after the fish move offshore in the post spawn. And if we take a look at this area, you'll notice that most of these points are very steep. The contour lines are very tight together right when they leave the bank. But if we move to this point here, you can see these contour lines are a little bit more spread out, and it's a little bit flatter up on top of this point. And what these fish will do is they'll set up on that flatter spot. And if we switch back over again to the Navionics, or to Google Earth, I'm getting that mixed up all day. Back over to the, right over here, to the Google Earth, you'll notice that, again, there is really not that many trees in this area. These trees are not really super prevalent, but there are a few back in here. And so what you might find is that there's going to be maybe someone planting a brush pile or some laid down trees or some individual trees out here. And you can fish, again, a cast to a cast and a half away from the bank, and those fish will definitely feed out here in this area. So that's another good spot. And I'm seeing everyone's questions fly through, guys. I'm going to try to get through this breakdown really quick so I don't get too distracted. And then I will get to everyone's questions after the end of the stream so that we'll be able to get through everyone. So if I don't answer your question and you have to jump off the stream or something like that, come back and watch the video again after I upload it. I'll get through everyone's questions after the stream and answer them all, so no worries there. And even if they require me to go to other lakes and stuff, I can do that. And so I will answer everyone's questions right after the stream is done. Well, it won't be done. I'll keep going, but like after I finish all these lakes, if that makes sense. So anyways, another spot that I liked out here is if you look at this creek channel, again, kind of what I do is I just kind of follow this main river channel, and I find places where this main river channel intersects some of these pockets and shorter areas in here. And the reason, again, I like this is because these fish can spawn here, and then they can quickly move back out to this main river area, this main lake area. And without there being that many offshore spots, a lot of times it's a lot easier to just follow this main river channel and find places where it runs up against 10 to 15 feet of water, and there's a little bit flatter spot. A lot of times those spots can be really good. And so what I would do is I would look for like this spot right over here, where you have this creek channel swinging in. It swings in against this little pocket here, and then right up on top there's actually a flat area, and it's maybe a little bit hard for you guys to see, but contour lines are very tight together off this point, and then they spread out, and you get a spot that's maybe, let's say 15 feet of water, maybe 12, 15 feet of water right next to that creek channel. And this is basically just a creek channel ledge. And all you're going to do is fish the center of this pocket. It's almost like you sit your boat out here and you just cast into the middle of this pocket and bring a crankbait or a jig around there. And with all these areas, guys, I'm going to be graphing over them first before I fish them. I'm going to be looking for bait. I'm going to be looking for fish on my graph. And I'm not going to make any casts on these spots unless I actually see fish down there. And a lot of times you'll pull over the spot and you may see a bunch of dots on the graph and some shadow. You'll see something down there. You're not sure though if it's bass or crappie or whatever. I would still fish those areas for sure, because a lot of times when you're first learning to read your electronics, it's hard to tell what's bass and what's not bass. But if you graph over this area, you graph over it and you see that there's nothing on your graph. There's no shad, there's no fish, and maybe it's just a tree by itself with nothing else around it, then I would leave that area and don't even bother making a cast. But if you do see some activity around it with like a cloud of bait or fish, definitely check it out. And if you do want to learn more about how to use your electronics, go to my YouTube channel. You'll be able to find some videos on how to read your fish finder. I have a complete guide to fish finders, a complete guide to contour line maps, all that stuff. So if you need some help following along, check out those videos. But then, a couple more areas I really like is you can kind of get the trend here in a second, but any place where this creek channel swings up and rolls up against some shallower water. And when I'm talking shallow water, I'm talking, let's say, 20 feet and less of water. And I'm also looking for places that are flatter. So they have a flat area up on top. So they're not like a super steep drop. Like right here, you can see these contour lines are really tight together. They're really steep. I'm looking for areas where I can actually see some separation in those contour lines, like an area like this where those contour lines are more spread apart, or an area like this where you have a contour lines very spread apart, creating a high spot. Another spot that looks really good to me is even like right off this point here. This creek channel swings in, and it swings into this bay and kind of feeds this creek. And so it splits off from this main channel, and you have a little bit of a flatter point again. Contour lines are a little more spread out, and that top of that point's in 15 to 20 feet of water. It's a good spot to check out. Same baits, deep diving crankbait, jig, 10-inch worm, Carolina rig, the basic or these usual suspects. A few more areas I really like. As you come in around this corner, this creek channel swings by, and there's actually a nice little flat point up here. And even though it's not super close to either of these creek channels, it is almost like right between two creek channels. And so this little spot in here could be really good, either up on top of this point up shallow, a little bit deeper off this point here, or even out here in the 25 feet of water closer to that channel. I'm just going to kind of start ripping through spots to give you guys an idea of what I'd be looking for. But we have a nice flat point right here. Looks really good. Let's see here. Keep going around. You have another kind of flatter point that's between two nice creek channels here. As you move back in here, we have another kind of flatter point or a flatter area right in here that drops into this creek channel. So this spot right here could be very good. It's very flat next to the creek channel, has that 15 foot of water next to it. Just what you're looking for. Hopefully you guys, this is all making sense now as you see me kind of picking out several areas. And the big thing is I can show you guys some of these areas, but obviously not all these areas are going to have fish. And so you have to make sure that you check a lot of areas throughout your day. Don't just pull up and go to the 6 areas I show you on your home lake and say, okay, I'm going to fish all 6 of those areas, and that's it. Those are the only areas I'm ever going to fish. Instead, try to find the trends in what I'm looking for and try to find similar areas around other parts of your lakes, because I'm just ripping through these lakes really quick on the fly. I take a look at the lakes, I kind of get a general feel for what they are, but like this spot, I'm finding this on the fly. So there's probably several spots I'm missing that are good, so don't take these spots as the only spots to look at, but hopefully you can figure out, at least from what I'm doing, the trends and how I'm looking at these spots. Like again, nice little flat spot right here next to that main creek channel, or like right here, you have a nice point that sticks out here. It's flatter up on top with some flooded timber, drops right into the channel. That's going to be a good spot. And so as you can see, there are tons of areas of fish on this lake. I mean, even right here, you have this main river bar that kind of runs out almost, and it's 15 foot up top, and it's hooked around by this channel. This could be a really good summertime spot for these fish to pull up on, where there's a nice steep drop. And so there's several areas in this lake that look really good. I mean, I could keep going on and on forever. Another spot right here. A good spot right here. This is a good little river ledge right here. Actually, you get these more of like a river ledge all the way up here, where you could almost graph down this whole ledge and find places where you get a high spot right here, or a little indentation, fish around this, all kinds of stuff on this lake. So even though this lake looked at the very beginning to be very narrow and not have that much offshore structure, we're able to find a ton of spots in about 15 minutes that you guys can check out on this lake. So hopefully that was helpful. And what I'm going to do is actually go straight to my last lake here, because I see a bunch of people leaving comments, but I'm going to jump into the comments here in just a second. right after I finish this, and I'll keep answering the questions. And I'm basically going to answer all your questions that have at Fish the Moment, where you get the red at Fish the Moment logo popping up, and it have a bunch of question marks at the end. Or at least you have to put the at Fish the Moment if you have a question. And so definitely leave that. If you've already put a comment down in there and I didn't look at it, put at Fish the Moment in there, and it definitely helps me find you. But we're going to jump straight to Big Green so we finish at least the lakes up on time. So let's do that. Give me 1 second. I'm going to switch back over to Google Earth. Okay. Flying from Kentucky, now we're going to go way up to Wisconsin. And I was actually born up in Wisconsin. I lived in West Bend, Wisconsin, just south of Milwaukee, if anyone knows where that is, and went to school in Milwaukee, and so spent my youth fishing on the Milwaukee River and the Wisconsin River and a lot of lakes around here. Fished probably 30 or 40 tournaments in Wisconsin, maybe 30 tournaments before I moved down to Arkansas, just junior tournaments and stuff since I was like 9 years old till I was 12, and so a lot of different lakes I've fished. I fished Oshkosh, Lake Winnebago, the Madison chain of lakes, a ton of places, Big Green, Lake Geneva, all over the place. And so Big Green is a really cool lake. If we look at it, it's just a big bowl like some people were talking about in the comments below. You also have some nice little backwater canals that these fish will pull into. You have some offshore grass. You have inside grass lines. You have outside grass lines. You also have a ton of boat traffic in the summer, like 1 billion boats. You have shallow boat docks that you can fish and catch fish off the shallow boat docks. You can go back into some of these shallower bays and find fish back in here, and find some shallower areas that these fish will spawn in. You can find fish in the canals around here. So there's a ton of places that you can catch fish. And actually, when I fished second in a tournament out here on Big Green for a Fish as a Men tournament, we're actually back fished it, I think in like late June, bass were still spawning or just early post-spawn, and the fish were back in this canal back in here. And we also fished this canal and this canal, but we fished these 3 canals in here and basically just fished down the dead center of them and all around these boat docks and caught about 16.5 pounds of largemouth back in here, fishing the boat docks, stuff like that. And that was a shoreline bite. The fish were up shallow on the shore, and we were just fishing down the bank. So definitely a valid strategy. But we were actually beat, and we finished second because the winning team caught 25 pounds of smallmouth fishing offshore. And so obviously that shallow bite was working pretty well for us. We got second, but there's always going to be better fish biting somewhere on the lake, and on this given day, the better fish were biting offshore, and the guys were catching 25 pounds of smallies out here in the center of the lake. And so what I want to do is kind of show you some of the areas these guys were fishing. I don't know the exact areas they were fishing, but I can give you a pretty good estimate of where they are, and I can also show you a few other areas that you may want to check out. But before we do that, I do want to just kind of run through and just show you guys these grass lines I'm talking about. And basically, if you look at this lake, you can see that there is a ton of grass all up in here, and then on some points, you can see that this grass line gets very thick, and it's very apparent right in here. And this is the grass, and this is no grass, and this is your hard grass line. And you'll have this hard grass line here, and then you'll have an inside grass line, like right in here, where the grass ends right before it hits the shore. And basically, the last 2 to 5 feet between the grass and the shore, you'll have no grass, and you'll have that inside grass line. And the bass will cruise this inside grass line during the pre-spawn and the spawn, the post-spawn, and then later into the summer they'll pull out this outside grass line and they'll sit there pretty much all summer, especially the largemouth, and they'll sit up in that grass. But what these guys are doing, if we switch over to Navionics real quick, so they're fishing offshore. And so here is Big Green Lake, and again, you can see this lake is pretty much just a big bowl. And everyone, might think, okay, this is a big bowl like Wisconsin Lake. There's no contour lines, there's no creek channels, there's no nothing. But that's definitely not the case, because if we take a look at this lake, you can see that there is actually a ton of offshore, what I would call ledges. You can see here's a nice sharp breakout here in the middle of this lake out here. You have a really sharp breakout here. He actually has better offshore structure than a lot of these places we were just looking at. Good flats up here these smallmouth can get on. sharper drops, really steep drops right here, more steep drops. I mean, there's stuff everywhere to fish. And so it's almost a little bit daunting to figure out where to start offshore because there's so much going on. And so, kind of like we were talking about on Sooner Lake for the grass, where these when we're fishing for smallmouth or fishing for largemouth offshore up in Wisconsin, first place I'm looking for are high spots, especially if I'm fishing around the grass. And here's an example of a high spot right here. It's in the mouth of this bridge, so there may be current pushing through here. And this high spot will have hard bottom, and you can catch fish around grass that is sticking out way into the lake off these flats. And so you may have some milfoil or hydrilla sitting out here in the middle of this flat. It may go out to about 10 foot of water. And so you can catch fish on these high spots up on these flats. You can also find them like on these deeper points stick out here. These bass will set up on these little points like this. Those can be really good. You can also find them on some of these steeper edges of this grass. So you can see these contour lines are very spread out here, and they start to shrink down and get tighter together. This little area right here could be a really good area to find them flipping that offshore grass. More high spots like this stuff right here. So again, this is a lot of stuff that the fish in Florida will actually get on. They get on these random little high spots out in the middle of the lake, and these high spots are always going to hold fish on lakes where it's pretty much featureless. So if we kind of cut this lake down and we said this is the whole lake, and especially if you're fishing in Florida, a lot of lakes look just like this. If you don't have a sharp drop or really steep area on your lake, look for these high spots or any depressions or ditches. Like right here, you have a kind of a little bit of a ditch or a depression that goes into this area. These areas right here or these high spots out here are going to be the places that those big bass will pull up on, even if it only has like a foot or two of actual depth change. A foot or two of depth change on a super flat lake is a huge deal, or on a big flat like this. Just having a 1 or 2 foot depth change, even a 6-inch depth change, can cause those fish to really stack up. And you also can find that sometimes these really gradual depth changes, like this right here where you have this point sticking out here, this point may be 6 inches higher than this whole flat, but that's enough of a depth change for those fish to use to ambush bait and pull up on a flat. And so these type of areas can be really good on those Florida lakes. But my guess for where these guys are catching these big smallmouth offshore is not actually up on these flats, but it's actually out here in the deeper water, out here in about 15 to 25 feet of water, maybe even out to 30. And places I would say are good suspects are like this point out here, or this little hump out here. There's a hump and it drops off on all sides into 40 foot of water, 28 foot up on top. Maybe they're fishing on the edge of this little drain or this ditch that comes through here. Fishing on both sides of this ditch could be really good. Maybe even out here on some of these sharper, steeper points that stick out here. 21 foot of water up here, like a high spot, and then it drops in that super deep water. And basically, smallmouth will just kind of roam up and down these edges of these drops, and then they'll pull up onto these flats to feed. And if there's any big boulders out there or isolated patches of grass, stuff like that, you can catch them fishing a drop shot down there, a swim bait, even a deep diving crankbait, or a big tube with like a 3/4 ounce head ripping that tube offshore. And you can catch some really big smallmouth off these areas. And really what you're looking for, again, are any places where you have a irregularity along a drop. So like even just this flat stretch of bank here, you can see right here these contour lines get really tight together, and it creates a little bit of a point, a steep point, and it's pretty flat on both sides. This steep point right here that comes off from this flat, this could be a good area to find some good smallmouth. This point right here could be very, very good, or this point right here. I'm just going to start pointing out a bunch of areas, guys. Right here. Right here, there's actually a high spot up on this flat. This could be a good place where maybe even though it's in 8-9 feet of water, it's very close to 100 feet of water, and those smallmouth might be sitting out here off this break all morning or all afternoon or whatever, and then when the wind picks up or something happens, they push up on this little high spot up here on this like a rock pile or something, and you can catch them fishing a jerkbait over the top of these little rock piles or pretty much anything. So a few more areas here. You have this kind of this deeper point that sticks out here. Got another high spot. Got a nice drop with a nice point here. High spot, depression, high spot, high spot. So many spots out here, guys, to fish. Right here, point. Got a little turn in here. Got a nice point. Got a high spot. Or this is actually maybe a little high spot and then a little depression. Even like back here in this bay, you can see there's a high spot. And so these fish may be sitting out here on these docks spawning, and then some of the largemouth may pull off the dock, especially if there's a ton of fishing pressure or boat traffic, and they may pull off in here into the middle of this bay, and you might be able to catch them out here in 3 foot of water, throwing a Senko or fishing a jig or something off this point out here. And so tons of places, guys, you can check out on these lakes. This area actually looked really good to me down here. It's big, flat, and then all of a sudden you have a high spot here. You have another kind of high spot that rolls in through here with a little bit of ditch. And there's some canals these fish can spawn in, and then there's some very deep water out here where these fish can set up on this point. And so one thing you may want to do if you're fishing big green, and you don't really know where the fish are, is you could start first thing in the morning, run to this canal, fish up shallow, see if there's fish spawning or up shallow. And then what you could do is work your way out of these pockets, maybe fish this little point, this high spot here, or this ditch. You could also just kind of fish this little steeper area right here. The contour lines get a tiny bit closer together right here. Fish this steeper stretch of grass. Then move out here, fish this high spot out here, and then finally work your way out to some of these deeper points off this drop. There's 1, 2, 3 points, and try to find some big smallmouth on the edge of the grass or even just out there on some rock piles. Whew. Okay, so that was a lot. I feel like I've been talking for 2 hours now. I'm very tired for some reason today, but hopefully I was able to get all the information out, and hopefully it all made sense and I wasn't talking too fast. But that's it for the lake portion of the stream, and so thanks everyone for joining the lake portion of the stream. Now I'm going to get to the Q&A and actually start talking about some of the questions you guys have. So if you guys want to stick around for that, feel free. If you have to jump off, you can always come back and watch the Q&A section after the video is uploaded live to YouTube. And if you do want to have your lake looked at on my live stream in the future, then feel free to join my Patreon page. It's down there in the bottom right corner. You can join the page and recommend lakes for me to look at on my live stream. And also you can vote on which lakes you want me to break down for my website lake breakdowns, where you can buy them stock lake breakdowns with like 50 spots, where I'll spend like an hour or 2 hours looking at a lake, probably about 2 hours looking at a lake, digging through all the best subtle spots you could ever want to find on a lake like this offshore, and I'll mark those up and send them, or I'll put those up on my website. And then also go to my website if you want to book an on-the-water fishing lesson in Missouri, Northwest Arkansas, or Oklahoma, or in Central Arkansas. Or if you want to have a one-on-one video lesson where I can actually go talk to you like this on a video chat, and I can go on Google Hangout with you. I can look through your lake. We can talk about tournament prep. We can talk about tournament strategy. There's all kinds of different offerings I have for fishing instruction on my website, which is fishthemoment.com. So definitely check that out if you're interested. A lot of my stuff is selling out like immediately, so I have very few spots open for my on-the-water fishing lessons and very few spots available this month for my one-on-one fishing lessons that are like face-to-face, virtually at least. So definitely go to my website and check those out if you want to book one of those. But other than that, let me jump into some of these questions and try to get all these answered. Also, give me 1 second just to catch my breath here. Whew. Let's see here. So we got Robert Willard. He says, Johnny, do you move around the lake until you find a good watercolor before you start scanning or fishing? Yeah, normally what I like to do is if I'm trying to scan for fish and fish offshore, I normally try to find at least, let's say, 1.5 foot of visibility. It's really hard to catch fish in 1 foot of visibility offshore unless you find an offshore spot that's like in 3 or 4 feet of water. A lot of times these fish need a little bit of water clarity to get out to that 10 to 15 foot range. And a lot of times you won't be able to see fish on your fish finder if they're in 3 or 4 or 5 feet of water. A lot of times to see them clearly on your fish finder, they need to be out there in about that 10 to 15 foot range. And so definitely I want to find a little bit clearer water, because that clearer water will put those fish a little bit deeper. And then we have Dalal Woods. He said, any pattern for clear lakes with grass? So clear lakes with grass, that's big green right here. So everything I just talked about, fishing the high spots, the ditches, stuff like that, that's what this is right here. So all the stuff I just talked about, that's what you need to be looking for. Can you explain how to find more detail? Can you Can you explain in more detail how to fish the ledges? That's Dale Fletcher. Yeah, Dale, what I would recommend is going to my YouTube channel and checking out a video that's a complete guide to offshore ledge fishing. And I have that video on my channel. It's one of my top videos. And so it will explain what a ledge is, how to fish it, how to drive across it, and it'll do a way better job than I can do just talking a little bit on my stream. So go to my YouTube channel, check out my video. It's a complete guide to offshore ledge fishing. It's like a 30-minute video. It's super in-depth. It has a lot of views, so people seem to like it. So check that video out. We got Ernest McKinter. He said, do you use a mono leader on braid when fishing a swim bait, like a trash fish on a ledge? So if I'm fishing a swim bait on a ledge, normally I'm fishing, the biggest swim bait I'll fish on a ledge is maybe a 6-inch, like Bass Tricks or a Shadlicious swim bait. And normally I'll just throw it on 20-pound fluorocarbon line. And I will normally not fish, if I'm fishing like a super big, I don't really ever throw like super big 8-inch swim baits out on deep ledges. I'll fish those a little bit shallower. And if I am fishing a giant swim bait, let's say like a depths, or I'm fishing any of the really big ones, you guys know what they are. I'm blanking off the top of my head, but all the really big swim baits, I will throw either a braid to mono or braid to fluoro leader with like a 25-pound fluorocarbon or 25-pound mono. Sometimes I may actually not even use a braid leader. I'll just throw 25-pound big game straight, just in case that knot doesn't work very well, and I break the knot and I send my $50 swim bait out in the middle of the lake. From the edge to the ledge, did answer my question. Awesome. So I'm glad that we got that covered. Got a bunch of people responding here. Let's keep going. Oops, I think I skipped ahead. Give me 1 second. Okay, where are we at? So already prevents camping. Same thing. Okay, Andrew Smedley. Oh, he already answered that. Oh, okay. 1 second. Okay, Curtis says, when are you going to have lake breakdowns available on your website again? Thanks. Curtis, I'll have a lot more lake breakdowns available starting June 1st. I'll try to be doing 6 a week, so 6 lake breakdowns a week that will be open. So I know demand has been super high for those, so I want to try to get as many of those done as I can. It's hard to do that right now while still working full-time, but once I am working full-time on the fishing stuff starting in June, I'll be able to do a lot more of those. And so I'll also be doing specific lakes for sales, like a stock map. And you can also always book a one-on-one video lesson with me so we can walk through your lake on a lesson if you need something before June. Let's keep going here then. Let's see here. Cole Lakely says, Johnny, what is your caffeine shad setup for post-spawn/summer? So my caffeine shad setup, so it's a Strike King caffeine shad. It's a fluke style bait. Actually, let me pull this up on Tackle Warehouse so you guys can see this. Give me 1 second. Let's see here. Take this off. Pull this up. Okay, here we go. So Tackle Warehouse. We're going to do I can never spell caffeine shad. I don't know why I can't spell caffeine. It's not how you spell caffeine. I don't know why I can't spell caffeine. It's like the one word that I just don't know how to spell. There we go, caffeine shad. So this is a Strike King caffeine shad. This is one of my favorite post-spawn baits when I'm fishing up shallow. Just a 5-inch fluke style bait, but I fish it kind of like a Senko, and it works super well if you have shallow grass, shallow bushes, stuff like that. And I'm also throwing it in the smoky shad color. And so my stock setup for this coal is I'll throw it on a bait caster with 15-pound fluorocarbon line, and I'll throw it with a 6-aught extra wide gap hook. So that 6-aught extra wide gap hook is mandatory when fishing this caffeine shad. I've lost so many fish on a 5-aught extra wide gap hook on this bait. It's not big enough because this bait's actually pretty wide top to bottom. And so it's like, I guess, a tall bait, and it will scrunch up on that hook, and you'll lose like 1 out of every 3 fish you hook on this bait if you're not using a 6-aught hook. And because I'm using that 6-aught hook, I need to throw 20 or 15-pound fluorocarbon with a bait caster. And I'll throw like a 7-foot or a 7.3 medium heavy action rod with this thing, and the fish don't seem to mind having the 15-pound fluorocarbon on there. They'll still bite it really well, especially if you're fishing around any sort of cover. It won't make a difference. This color is shocking. I don't know who thought this color would be interesting, but that is, wow, that is bright. That is hurting my, I'm going to get away from that. That is really bright. Um, anyways, Ulysses says, is it necessary to use a spinning setup for a drop shot? Can you use a bait caster? Does that work just as good? You can definitely use a bait caster for a drop shot. Two things I recommend if you're doing that is one, use a lighter action bait caster. So use a bait caster that maybe is a medium action rod or something kind of like built for like a jerk bait or a spinner bait. And then also make sure you're using a little bit bigger hook. And so if we're talking drop shot hooks, what I would do is, let's see here. You have drop shot hooks that are like these nose hook things that a lot of people would throw with a drop shot, but I would actually not use those. Definitely not recommend those if you're fishing with a bait caster. I would recommend using like these robo worm kind of straight shank hooks. Let me find a better one. Maybe that is the only one. This is the one I've used in the past, but if you look at this, you have it's like robo worm straight shank hook. This thing is a little bit bigger and it'll be a little bit, it won't bend out and you won't pull that hook out of the fish's mouth as much when you're fishing that drop shot on the bait caster. I hate fishing spinning rods, so I completely get your struggle there. But what I would do is if you were going to do this, I would fish this on about 10-pound test on your bait caster. So fish it on 10-pound test with this type of hook and a little bit bigger hook with a bigger gap and you'll be good to go. Let's see here. Then where's JT? Someone said JT slacking. That is so true. Where is JT at? He said your boy is late, but for a good reason. John Boat Project is going strong. So anyway, we're missing you, JT. So I'm glad you're back. Let's see here. Ulysses asked again, the Rayburn and Toledo Bend maps that you're selling, will they be from personal experience on these lakes? So the Rayburn, yes. Toledo Bend will be more of just kind of what I think would be a good spot to check out on that lake. And so a lot of it won't be like spots that I've particularly fished, but it would be spots that I think I would go check out if I was going to that lake. And it's spots that I would try to graph and look for fish on. And you might think, okay, well, I don't want to spend money on spots that Johnny hasn't actually fished before. But I actually just did a Toledo Bend breakdown for a guy, and he sent me a picture and said he caught his personal best bass on one of the spots I marked on hit on the map for Toledo Bend, and he said that he caught a bunch of really good fish offshore off those spots. And so I'm normally pretty good at picking offshore spots, even if I haven't fished there. And so I think hopefully you can trust me enough to maybe take a chance on the map, but that is pretty good feedback, I guess, when the guy catches his personal best bass when he's lived on the lake for a long time off the spot I recommend that I've never fished before. So hopefully that answers the question. And so we got Brandon McDade says, with the elites fishing on Fort Gibson in a few weeks, what do you think it will take to win and how will the fish be caught? So Brandon, with them fishing on Fort Gibson in a couple weeks, I'm thinking that most of the fish are going to be caught maybe up the river or somewhere where you're going to get a lot of current because there's been so much rain recently. And so I'm thinking that the current will definitely help get some of those fish going on Fort Gibson. And then also on that lake, you may be able to catch some fish offshore. There are fish that are already pushing offshore, and so you may find some guys fishing away from the bank, even if it's just out there in 4 to 8 feet of water, fishing like a swing head on some rocks, stuff like that. That's where I would be fishing if I was going to fish the tournament. I would definitely be fishing away from the bank, up in 4 to 8 feet of water on some rock with a swing head, stuff like that. So that's what I would be doing, but there's probably going to be guys catching some fish up the river too. Clayton says, guys, go to Johnny's Patreon page and make lake requests there. Appreciate that, Clayton. And then Kevin Hutchinson says, can you elaborate on offshore depth? Clear water, find fish at 30 feet, dirty water, find fish no deeper than 10 feet, etc. Yeah, so Kevin, I talked about this in my last live stream, so I don't want to get into it super in depth, but I'm definitely going to make a video about it when I start making videos again at a more consistent pace in June. But basically, rule of thumb is if you have less than a foot of water visibility, fish no deeper than about 8 feet of water, 7 to 8 feet of water. If you have a foot to 2 foot of visibility, you can fish from 8 to 12 feet of water, maybe up to 13 or 14 feet. Maybe even out to 15 feet, so maybe 8 to 15 feet if you have 1 to 2 foot of visibility. 2 to 3 foot of visibility, it's good from about 15 to 20. And then after you get past about 20 feet of water, 25 feet of water, and that water clarity gets above 3 foot, you really want to focus on the thermocline and where the thermocline is created. And you can look up videos on what a thermocline is. I'll also be making videos on that. But basically, of 0 to 1 foot of visibility, don't fish deeper than 8 feet. 1 to 2 foot of visibility, don't fish deeper than 15. 2 to 3 feet of visibility, don't fish deeper than 20 or 25. So I came up with that off the top of my head as like those ranges. I'll have to think about it more from past experience, but that sounds right from I've done a ton of fishing on offshore on all different lakes. So that seems about right, but I might try to do some data on that and make it a little more scientific than just my rough estimates. Anyways, we got Dan here. He says, "Is there much advantage of a swim jig with underspin or versus spinnerbait tipped with a swim bait?" Probably not. I would say it's probably about the same thing. Other than maybe the swim jig, it may have a little bit, maybe a little more weedless, and the spinnerbait may push a little bit more water. So if you want more vibration and dirtier water, fish the spinnerbait. If you're fishing around a lot of cover, maybe fish the swim jig. Chad McWhite says, "What features are you looking for on offshore humps? And do you only fish one if you mark fish?" Chad, great question. Let me jump over to my Navionics really quick and show you that. So I'll actually show you an example of a hump that I catch fish on and show you some of the ones that I like. They're good. We'll go down here, go up here. So here are some humps. Beaver Lake. Actually, I have a better one. Let me go down here. I'll go to a better hump. That hump I was going to show you I caught like 2-pounders on. I want to show you a hump I've caught like 5-pounders on, so you guys can at least get a better feel for what a good hump looks like. Here are some humps on Lake Washita in Arkansas. Big lake, it has a ton of water to fish, and it's very, very daunting to fish sometimes, but these are some humps. They're out here in the middle of this bay, and I've caught some big fish on these humps. And there's a few of them I like to look at. Really, the big thing with humps is that I'm really just looking for any humps that are surrounded by some pretty deep water. So I want deep water close by, and I want those humps to come up to a specific depth range where I think the fish are. So in this case, this hump is in 29 feet of water, which I think on Lake Washita is a pretty good depth. A lot of times these fish will get out to anywhere from 25 to 30 feet of water in the summer, maybe 20 to 30. And so really what I'm looking for with these humps is they top out in the expected depth range. And we just kind of talked about which depth ranges those fish get in, depending on water clarity or the thermocline. And so I'm looking for humps that top out in those areas. And I'm also looking for humps that have some sort of cover on them. So you want to have humps that have brush or standing timber. And in this case, this hump has grass and standing timber on it. And then the other thing you can look for that actually help make these humps a little bit better is if we go further back into these creeks, is you can look for humps that have creek channels by them. And so this is another hump I've caught some good fish on Lake Washita. And if you look at this hump, it's basically 2 creek channels swing right by it. So there's a deep creek channel here, and then there's a deep creek channel right here, and this is a hump right out here off this point. And this hump is 22 feet of water on top, right in that good depth range, 20 to 25, 30 feet. It also has some sandy timber up and some brush piles on it, and there's also a creek channel that winds on both sides. This is an ideal looking hump. And so creek channels around it, cover in the right depth range, and you'll be good to go on your humps. Hope that answers the question, Chad. See here. Cole Lakely again. Johnny, what is your exact caffeine setup? Oh, I already got that one. Oh, did I skip around? Did I miss stuff, guys? Maybe Cole asked again. Oh, okay. Cool. Cole asked that question again. Hopefully I got that to you before. Rusty Parker. Lakes flooded severely, say 20 to 30 feet high. Where do you start? Great question. So if a lake is 20 to 30 feet high, I'm actually going to pull up Google Earth for this because there's some cool things you can do. So lakes are 20 to 30 feet high. And so a lot of places like this would be like a lake like in Oklahoma, and lakes that I'm going to use is actually Greer's Ferry Lake in Arkansas. And this is a lake that was actually like 20 feet high or 15 feet high. And so basically what I'm looking for when a lake like this floods, and this is a deep, clear lake. It's super deep. It has some clear water, it has smallmouth, largemouth, stuff like that. First thing I'm looking for when my lake floods 20 to 30 feet is picnic tables. Not joking. Picnic tables. Those are so good because there's always have picnic tables around all of these boat ramps and stuff like that. And if you look at this lake right here, you can see that there's actually, this is the boat ramp, one of the boat ramps where you launch over here. And when the lake was super high, I was actually catching fish one year on this picnic table right here. And there's a bunch of these like kind of man-made structures and stuff like that get flooded. And we're looking for places where this water will flood up really, really high. And I'm not talking just picnic tables. That's kind of a joke. But it's like, a picnic table, a man-made like sign or a building, stuff like that. But you want to kind of find like isolated pieces of cover like this that are way up shallow, because these fish will push up super, super shallow. And you want these picnic tables, stuff like that, to be maybe 2-3 foot of water. They're still visible. You may find fish that are kind of a little bit pushed up a little bit further off the bank. And what basically happens is that these fish will pull up, they'll get up super, super shallow, and they'll go into any flooded cover, any man-made cover you can find. And so try to follow those fish into that flooded area. And as the water starts to drop out, you can follow those fish back. Those fish will start to pull back out to the old bank line as that water recedes. And then another place I'm looking, if we go up to Lake Dardanelle, actually, this lake was 10 to 15 feet high a while back. And when the Bassmaster Elite Series was here, Mark Davis and where am I going? I'm going way too far. Mark Davis and Steve Kennedy actually ended up doing really well in a tournament fishing way up the river on Lake Dardanelle, and where they were fishing was actually a really cool place. Mark Davis was fishing in the back of one of these creeks, and if we look at this creek right here, it goes back way up in here, and there's actually an old little pond or an old road that runs in the back of here, and he was jumping over the top of this road and getting into this backwater area where you can normally never get to. And there's actually an old quarry back in here, and the water was so high it was pushing back into the shallow area, and so he was setting up in this actual quarry. There was some like water that actually got back in this quarry. He was up on top of this road and all the way back in here. And so sometimes you can find areas where there's actually water here, but it's separated from the main river. Or the main lake. Those are good. And then Steve Kennedy was actually catching fish out of this quarry up here. And the water actually flooded all the way up here, and he was able to work his way back into this quarry. And Steve Kennedy actually won his tournament fishing this quarry that you can normally never get to, because obviously it's dry land all around here, but the water flooded enough that he could actually sneak back in here and fish this flooded quarry. So finding lakes, or maybe even if it's like a farm pond, if you go on your lake and you see that there's some ponds that are close by to where your lake is, like let's say, there's a little, it's going to be so hard to find something on the fly, but hopefully you get what I'm talking about. Like let's say there's a little pond, like I kind of just showed you, like this pond right here. Let's just assume that somehow the water flooded so high that it actually got up to this pond. Fishing these ponds, they get flooded because the lake floods so much. That's the deal. Cool. So whoops. A lot of questions, guys. It's awesome though. My top spinner, do you do breakdowns just for bass or also for crappie? Only for bass, unfortunately. I'm not a big crappie guy, so I don't have too many insights there. I catch enough crappie probably to be a crappie guide, because I find a ton of crappie offshore, and I know what they look like on my graph. I could tell you about 50,000 crappie spots where I've caught them in the past, but I don't focus on that. I focus on bass, so unfortunately, only bass for the breakdowns. But if I do pick some offshore spots for you, you may find some crappie there too. Azen Hick says, Johnny, have you tried the Tokyo rig? I have not. I'm actually thinking about, in some of my YouTube videos, trying some of the weird rigs. Like there's the Tokyo rig. There's all these different rigs that I've not tried, and so I'm thinking about doing some of that just to kind of experiment. But most of the time I find that I catch most of my fish on a crankbait, a jig, and a topwater. And that's pretty much year-round. If I'm going to catch a big fish, like a 4-pound plus bass, it's going to be on a jig, a crankbait, or a topwater. And so I stick with those pretty much year-round, other than the topwater in the winter, obviously. I'll maybe switch in a jerkbait instead. But those kind of 3 baits, the jerkbait, the jig, crankbait, and topwater, are going to get it done for me. So I kind of stick to those baits rather than try to experiment too much, just because they always get it done for me, and I always catch good fish on them. And then... okay, a few more questions. Julia, she's asking, Any suggestions for Winter Haven chain of lakes in Florida? Julia, I won't be able to take a look at the lake right this second, but if you want to join my Patreon page over there and join, you can put in the lake for a suggestion, or you can book a one-on-one fishing lesson, do a lake breakdown on my website, stuff like that, are good ways to reach that. Unfortunately, I just don't have too much time right now to do anything just kind of ad hoc around here. So trying to get to the quick questions, but definitely check those out. And I would love to take a look at your lake for sure. So definitely go check out those couple different sites and see what you can find there. Or take those look. Sorry, I'm like out of it. I felt like that sounded rude, but I'm not trying to be rude, Julia. I apologize. But talking for an hour and 18 minutes is a little bit tough. It wears me out. But anyways, um, Kendall Arnold's is asking, what do you consider offshore or deep on a lake like Asian Lake or oh, he's a Kentucky Lake. So oh, Asian. I got you, Kendall. Nice joke. He's saying that because there's Asian carp all over the lake. Again, it's an hour and 18 minutes, and I'm missing the humor. But what I do on Kentucky Lake with all the Asian carp, deep on Kentucky Lake, I'd say is about 25 feet. A lot of times you can catch fish on Kentucky Lake actually off the ledges in 25, maybe even down to 30 feet on big swim baits, a 10XD or a big swim bait. And when I fish Pickwick Lake, actually, for a college tournament out there, guys were catching fish out there in like 28 feet of water off the end of the ledges. And so deep is about 28 to 30. I would say deep water starts on that lake at about 8 feet of water, and those fish will get offshore into 8 foot, especially down in Paris, Tennessee, on the lower end of Kentucky Lake. And then as you go further up the lake towards the dam on the north end, those fish will get down there in the 25, 30 feet even. Tim Yoder says best baits for fishing grass lakes in the summer offshore. I would say a 1 ounce jig, which is like a 1 ounce flipping jig with a striking rage craw, or a 3/4 ounce football jig. And I would fish the football jig on the outside grass lines if the grass is a little bit more sparse. And I'm trying to fish it in like the deep grass offshore that's not up to the top of the surface. And then if you have grass that comes up within like 2 or 3 feet of the surface offshore, flipping that 1 ounce jig in that grass is going to get it done. And also a drop shot on the edge of the grass will also work really well, or a Carolina rig. And a striking cutter worm is also really good if it's shallower grass, like grass less than 10 foot of water. See here. I'm going to answer a few more questions, guys, and I have to jump off here. But Seth, what do you recommend to do on Table Rock this week? I heard flooded bushes. Seth, I would fish offshore for sure. There are fish up in the flooded bushes, but the water's dropping out of the lake, and those fish are pulling offshore. I would look for secondary points, and I would fish those points in about 15 to 25 or 30 feet of water with a swing head. So like a biffle swing head, and put a striking menace grub on it and wind that thing down there in 15 to 30 feet of water. And also fish off of any main lake points in the Mousa Creeks. I've been catching like 30 to 40 fish a day, fishing a swing head in front of those points. I also catch them on a swim bait and a shaky head. And I'm catching a ton of 2.5 to 3 pound smallmouth, spotted bass, and also catching some largemouth. And the largemouth bite's still good up in the bushes. You can catch them up there shallow, but it's a great time to learn to fish offshore. So fish any secondary points out in about 15 to 20 feet. Keep your boat about a cast length away from the bank and then cast up to the shore. So your bait lands about a full cast length away from the bank. It's landing 20 to 30 yards away from the bank, and work that bait down those secondary points. You'll be good to go. Catch a bunch of big smallmouth, especially up the White River. White River's been on fire, like Shell Knob area has been on fire. Okay. B. Saunders, what would you do if you were fishing Grand Lake, Oklahoma in a week? I would pray that I could catch a fish with the lake being 6 feet high. But for real, I would probably try to fish any of the flooded bushes and flooded trees up shallow for sure, just because that water came up. And then if that water's falling out over this whole week, I would try to fish some offshore areas. There's some areas around the mid-lake area, like Horse Creek area, where there's actually some old house foundations out there. There's some old hard spots and rocky spots out there. You can find them on Google Earth if you take the lake back to like 2012 or something like that. You can actually find some of those. Actually, I should actually show you, since I have my Grand Lake folder open right here. While it's loading, answering their questions, and then I'll go answer that for you. Actually, I can do it right here. So right here, I think it's Horse Creek. I don't know the names of my Grand Lake creeks really quick. Really good, but let me see here. Go back in time. You go off like some of these islands right here. These islands are all flooded, right? And so these islands are all flooded in here, so you can catch them up flooded in these islands. And you can also, as the water's falling out, catch them cranking some of these house foundations and old stuff. They're out in like 4, 5, 6, 7 feet of water. As that water's dropping out of these bushes, these fish will pull out on this stuff. Be good to go. That'll at least be one area I would fish. There's a lot of places potentially to fish, but definitely some good areas in there. You can do a lake breakdown if you want to get a full breakdown. I have a ton of spots on Grand, so I don't want to put everything behind a paywall, guys, but also doing it full time, I definitely need to make sure I make enough money to be able to sustain myself and keep making content. So I do appreciate all the support there, and the guys who've been signing up for lessons and everything helps out a ton. It's making it a reality to be able to do this full time, so super excited. And then Judd Lynette says, what would you fish on the edge of a grass line? 3 things. I'd fish a drop shot. I would fish a drop shot, a 3/4 ounce football jig, or a 1 ounce football or a 1 ounce flipping jig. So flipping the edge of the grass with a jig. I would fish that drop shot on the edge of the grass. I'd also fish a cutter worm, a striking cutter worm, flipped on the edge of that grass. All 3 are really good options. Maybe even a Carolina rig too. Okay, cool. So anyways, let's see here. Yossi says, can I buy your Toledo Bend map in less than a week's time? Yeah, Ulysses, send me a message on either Instagram, or you can send me one on send me an Instagram or fishthemoment1@gmail.com. Just shoot me an email at fishthemoment1@gmail.com, and I can get that lake map over to you, because I already have that one actually made up. So for sure, let me know. Anyways, that's pretty much it, guys. It's an hour and 24 minutes in. I am very tired. I worked the full work day today, so I'm going to try to take a break. Then I'm going to start working on a new YouTube video for you guys right after the stream. But thank you for everyone who joined the stream. Got 155 guys on, which is awesome. I was a little bit worried there about my attendance for a little bit, but you guys always come through. So thanks again to Luis and to Drew for the super chats today. We had really good turnout as always, and it was fun breaking down some of these lakes. So really excited to join or see you guys again next week, next Tuesday, for another live stream, and we'll be able to look at a lot more lakes. Again, if you want to put your lake in for a live stream lake breakdown, go to my Patreon page over there, bottom right corner, patreon.com/fishthemoment. You'll also be able to get a lot of other perks coming up here as I start going full-time in June, so definitely excited to do all that, and thank you again for all the support. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next week.